In 1720, the French government faced a problem it had never encountered before. Not a foreign invasion, not a plague, not a famine. The problem was knowledge. Thousands of ordinary citizens had begun to understand exactly how the national currency functioned. Within months, the entire monetary system of France collapsed. The government's response was not to fix the system. It was to make public discussion of monetary mechanics a criminal offense. This was not an isolated incident. For most of human history, money appeared to be a simple concept. You worked, you received payment, you exchanged that payment for goods. The system seemed natural, almost elemental, like gravity or seasons. Empires rose and fell, but the basic logic of money remained comprehensible to the average person. This comprehensibility was itself a form of stability. When a Roman soldier received his salary in silver denarii, he understood what he held. The coin contained a measurable amount of silver. Its value was not a matter of belief or policy. It was a matter of weight and purity. If the emperor debased the currency by reducing silver content, people noticed immediately the deception was visible. The consequences were direct. This transparency created a natural limit on monetary manipulation. The government could only debase currency so far before merchants refused the coins. Soldiers revolted, or trade collapsed. The feedback loop was immediate and unavoidable. For centuries, this basic principle held across civilizations. Chinese dynasties issued copper coins. Islamic caliphates minted gold dinars. European kingdoms stamped silver pennies. The materials varied, but the fundamental logic remained constant. Money was a physical object with intrinsic value that facilitated exchange. Then something changed. The transformation began not with a revolution, but with a convenience. In 17th century Europe, merchants faced a practical problem. Transporting large quantities of gold and silver was dangerous and cumbersome. Goldsmiths, who already possessed secure vaults, began offering a solution. "Deposit your gold with us," they said, "and we will give you a paper receipt. Present this receipt at any time, and we will return your gold." The receipts were easier to carry than metal. They could be divided into convenient denominations. Gradually, people stopped redeeming them. Why go to the trouble of collecting gold when the paper receipt functioned just as well for purchases? The receipts themselves became money. The goldsmiths noticed something remarkable. On any given day, only a small fraction of depositors requested their gold. Most of the metal simply sat in the vault, unused. This observation led to a question. If 90% of the gold remains in the vault at all times, why not issue receipts for more gold than actually exists? The practice had a technical name: fractional reserve banking. The logic seemed sound. As long as depositors didn't all demand their gold simultaneously, the system functioned. And if the extra receipts stimulated commerce and trade, wasn't everyone better off? The goldsmiths became bankers. The receipts became currency. And the relationship between paper and metal became increasingly abstract. Governments observed this development with great interest. By the early 18th century, European governments had grasped the full implications of paper currency. If receipts could circulate as money without corresponding gold, then governments could issue paper to fund expenses without raising taxes or depleting treasuries. The temptation was irresistible. In 1716, France faced a fiscal crisis. Decades of warfare under Louis XIV had emptied the treasury and left the nation drowning in debt. Tax collection had reached its practical limit. The economy stagnated under the weight of obligation. The regent, Philippe d'Orléans, needed a solution. Enter John Law, a Scottish economist, with a bold proposal. Law argued that France's problem was not too much debt, but too little money in circulation. His solution was elegant: create a national bank authorized to issue paper currency backed not by gold, but by the theoretical value of France's colonial holdings in Louisiana. The Banque Generale was established in 1716. It issued paper notes redeemable in gold on demand. Initially, Law maintained conservative reserves. The notes functioned well. Public confidence grew. The regent granted Law additional authority. In 1717, Law founded the Mississippi Company, a commercial enterprise granted monopoly rights over French trade in North America. The company's stock was offered to the public. Law's bank issued loans to purchase the stock. More paper currency flooded into circulation. The economy responded dramatically. Commerce accelerated. Debt was refinanced. Asset prices soared. Paris experienced an unprecedented boom. Ordinary citizens who purchased stock early became wealthy. Stories of sudden fortunes spread throughout Europe. The system appeared to have solved an ancient problem. Prosperity no longer required hoarding precious metals. It required only confidence in paper and the institutions that issued it. For a brief period, it seemed that human ingenuity had transcended the old constraints. Money had been reimagined. France led the world into a new era. By 1719, speculation had reached a fever pitch. The Mississippi Company's stock price bore no relationship to the actual revenues from Louisiana, which remained largely undeveloped wilderness. Law responded to public enthusiasm by issuing more stock and more paper currency to purchase it. The French money supply expanded by several multiples within 3 years. Some observers began asking uncomfortable questions. How much gold actually backed the paper notes in circulation? What revenues did the Mississippi Company generate? Could the bank redeem all outstanding notes if demanded? Law dismissed these concerns publicly. The system was sound, he insisted. Value came not from metal, but from productive capacity and public confidence. Questioning the currency was unpatriotic, even dangerous. But doubts, once planted, grew. In early 1720, Prince de Conti, having made substantial profits, decided to redeem his paper notes for gold. He arrived at Law's bank with 3 wagon loads of currency. Law personally met him, and, after discussion, Conti agreed to accept only partial redemption. But word of the incident spread. Other wealthy holders began quietly converting paper to metal. Law recognized the threat. If redemptions accelerated, the bank's gold reserves would be exhausted in days. The entire system depended on most people not demanding redemption simultaneously. He needed to prevent panic. His response was to make conversion difficult. First, he restricted the amount of gold that could be redeemed at one time. Then he prohibited citizens from possessing more than a small quantity of gold or silver coins. Possession of metal beyond this limit became illegal. Informants were encouraged to report violators. These measures achieved the opposite of their intention. When a government prohibits citizens from holding the asset that supposedly backs its currency, a clear message is sent: the backing is insufficient. The restrictions confirmed what skeptics suspected: the paper notes could not be redeemed. Confidence evaporated. By May 1720, crowds besieged Law's bank, demanding gold. The building was barricaded. Soldiers were deployed. Riots erupted. Several people were trampled to death outside the bank's entrance. Law fled Paris in disguise. The Mississippi Company's stock became worthless. The paper currency lost 99% of its value within months. The French economy contracted violently. Merchants refused to pay. Commerce reverted to barter. Savings accumulated over lifetimes disappeared. The social contract between government and citizens sustained severe damage. 56 years later, across the Atlantic, a similar pattern emerged under different circumstances. In 1775, the Continental Congress faced a problem identical to the one that had confronted France. The American colonies sought independence from Britain, but lacked the funds to wage war. They possessed no significant gold reserves. They could not impose taxes effectively because they were not yet a functioning government. Yet armies required payment, supplies needed purchase, and wars consumed resources at extraordinary rates. The solution was paper currency. The Continental Congress began issuing notes called Continentals, backed initially by the promise of future tax revenues from the states. The currency was declared legal tender. Citizens were urged to accept it as payment for goods and services. Refusing Continentals was portrayed as aiding the British enemy. The first issuance was modest $6 million. The notes circulated successfully. Encouraged, Congress authorized additional printings, 2 million more in 1775, 19 million in 1776. The amounts accelerated: 13 million in 1777, 63 million in 1778. The total money supply grew without corresponding growth in goods and services. Predictably, prices rose. Congress insisted this was not a consequence of oversupply, but rather the result of hoarding and speculation by unpatriotic merchants. Several states passed price control laws. Merchants who charged excessive prices faced fines or imprisonment. These measures failed. Goods disappeared from markets or were sold secretly at higher prices. The gap between official prices and actual market prices widened. By 1779, continental currency had lost most of its value. The phrase "not worth a continental" entered common usage. Congress continued issuing more notes while denouncing speculation and demanding public confidence. George Washington wrote privately, "A wagon load of money will scarcely purchase a wagon load of provisions." In 1780, Congress attempted a monetary reform. Old continentals could be exchanged for new notes at a ratio of 40-1, explicitly acknowledging the currency's devaluation. Even this failed. The new notes depreciated rapidly. By 1781, the continental currency system had collapsed entirely. The consequences extended beyond immediate economic disruption. An entire generation learned profound distrust of paper currency issued by governments. This distrust shaped the constitutional debates. It explained the later insistence on gold and silver coinage provisions. It created lasting skepticism toward central monetary authority. Both episodes share a common architecture. A government facing urgent fiscal needs discovers the capacity to create money without immediate constraint. Initial issuance is conservative and successful. Public confidence grows, issuance accelerates. Questions about sustainability are dismissed as pessimistic or unpatriotic. Critics are marginalized. The gap between paper and underlying assets widens invisibly. Then, suddenly it becomes visible. The breaking point is not an event. It is a realization. In France, it was the moment citizens understood that paper notes could not be redeemed. In America, it was the moment merchants comprehended that the purchasing power of continentals had become fictional. The systems did not fail because of external shocks or conspiracies. They failed because the internal logic became transparent. This transparency was dangerous to authority. The aftermath of monetary collapse extends far beyond economic disruption. When a currency fails, it destroys more than savings. It destroys trust in institutions. Citizens who followed official guidance, who accepted government assurances, who behaved patriotically, find themselves impoverished, while those who distrusted authority preserved wealth. This creates profound social fissures. In France, after 1720, an entire vocabulary developed to describe those who had been ruined by law's system. Many were aristocrats who had converted land and tangible assets into paper at the government's urging. Their families never recovered. A class that had been wealthy for centuries was effectively eliminated. The redistribution of wealth was arbitrary and seemingly random, depending entirely on timing and skepticism rather than merit or virtue. This outcome generated lasting cynicism. Following the rules leads to ruin, and distrusting authority leads to survival. What incentive exists to cooperate with future systems? The American experience produced different but related consequences. The continental currency collapse ensured that the United States would spend the next century resistant to paper money. The Constitution explicitly granted Congress power to coin money, but said nothing about printing paper. This was not an oversight. It was a deliberate exclusion born from recent trauma. Yet the knowledge gained from these failures also created a problem for authorities. A population that understands exactly how currency expansion works is a population that cannot be easily persuaded to accept future expansion. The effectiveness of monetary manipulation depends substantially on public incomprehension. The standard response to currency collapse follows a predictable sequence. First, authorities deny the problem exists. Inflation is temporary, they insist, caused by external factors. Speculators, foreign enemies, merchant greeding, accept the issuance of currency itself. Second, they implement controls. Price restrictions are established. Hoarding is criminalized. Conversion to alternative forms of money is prohibited or heavily regulated. These measures fail because they treat symptoms rather than causes, and because they create black markets that undermine official markets. Third, they attempt reforms. A new currency is issued, often at a devalued exchange rate from the old currency. This new currency is proclaimed to be backed by something real: gold, silver, land, future taxes. Public confidence is demanded. Acceptance becomes a test of loyalty. Fourth, the cycle repeats. Each iteration teaches the same lesson. Currency expansion creates temporary stimulus followed by eventual collapse. But the lesson is forgotten or ignored because the benefits accrued to those in power during the expansion, while the costs are distributed across the general population during the collapse. This asymmetry creates a strong incentive to repeat the pattern. History shows that governments seldom fix monetary systems before collapse. They manage them, delay consequences, shift burdens, and hope the crisis emerges under different leadership. The pattern persists because the short-term political incentives overwhelm the long-term economic realities. The mechanics have grown more sophisticated, but the fundamentals remain unchanged. Modern monetary systems have removed the explicit link between currency and physical commodities. A US dollar bill contains no promise of redemption in gold or silver. It is simply a note, a liability of the central bank, backed by government bonds, which are themselves promises of future taxation. The entire structure rests on confidence and compulsion. Legal tender laws require acceptance of government currency for all debts. This compulsion is crucial. Without it, alternative forms of money would emerge organically based on trust and utility rather than mandate. The requirement to use government currency regardless of confidence level prevents the market discipline that once limited monetary expansion. Central banks now create currency electronically in quantities that would have been incomprehensible to earlier generations. The money supply of major economies has expanded by multiples within single decades. This expansion is presented as technical policy, quantitative easing, monetary stimulus, liquidity provision, terms that obscure rather than clarify. The pattern is familiar. Currency creation addresses immediate fiscal or political needs. It stimulates activity short-term. Questions about sustainability are dismissed as misunderstanding modern monetary systems. Critics are characterized as pessimists who don't understand contemporary economics. Asset prices rise dramatically. Those who own assets benefit enormously. Those who hold currency or earn wages experience diminishing purchasing power. The redistribution is substantial but occurs gradually enough that it doesn't trigger immediate political response. Across centuries and civilizations, monetary collapses follow consistent stages. Stage 1. A government faces fiscal pressure, war, debt, social spending that exceeds revenues from taxation. Stage 2. The government discovers a mechanism to create money without immediate consequence: basement, paper issuance, electronic expansion. Stage 3. Initial creation is modest and successful, generating confidence. Stage 4. Creation accelerates. Prosperity appears widespread. Asset prices rise. Economic activity increases. Stage 5. The gap between monetary supply and real productive capacity widens. Prices begin rising. Official explanations attribute this to anything except currency creation. Stage 6. Controls are implemented: price restrictions, capital controls, limits on alternative money, surveillance of transactions. Stage 7. Public awareness grows. Some citizens begin questioning the system's sustainability. These questions are discouraged, dismissed, or suppressed. Stage 8. A trigger event often small reveals the gap between paper promises and deliverable value. Stage 9. Confidence collapses suddenly, despite having eroded gradually. The system fails not through external attack but through internal realization. Stage 10. Authorities implement emergency measures, blame scapegoats, and promise reforms. Eventually, a new system is established that replicates the essential features of the failed one. This pattern is not a conspiracy. It is a structural tendency created by the incentives inherent in monetary systems controlled by those who benefit from expansion. Human psychology makes the pattern possible. People are optimistic by nature. They assume that because a system has functioned for years, it will function indefinitely. They trust institutions until evidence of betrayal becomes overwhelming. They normalize gradual changes that they would reject if presented suddenly. This normalcy bias is essential to monetary expansion. If a government announced that it would expand the money supply by 300% over 5 years, citizens would object immediately. But if the same expansion occurs incrementally, disguised by technical language, justified by economic theories, and distributed across various programs and policies, it proceeds without significant resistance. Another psychological factor is temporal discounting. The benefits of currency expansion arrive immediately: lower interest rates, rising asset prices, increased government spending. The costs arrive late in inflation, devaluation, eventual crisis. Political systems reward short-term benefits and defer long-term costs. This is not a flaw in the individuals involved. It is a structural feature of how power operates. There is also the complexity defense. Modern monetary systems are deliberately complex. The mechanisms are technical. The language is specialized. The operations are opaque. This complexity creates asymmetric understanding. Experts within the system understand it fully. The general population does not. This knowledge gap makes oversight difficult and manipulation easier. When citizens begin to understand these mechanisms, the protective opacity disappears. The most dangerous period in any monetary cycle is not the collapse. It is the quiet time before collapse, when the system still functions but the underlying contradictions have grown severe. During this phase, everything appears normal. Markets operate. Commerce continues. Governments issue reassuring statements. Economic statistics meet expectations or are revised to meet them. Critics exist, but they have existed for years. And nothing has collapsed yet, which is treated as evidence of their wrongness. But beneath the surface, adjustments occur. Central banks intervene in markets with increasing frequency. Government spending as a percentage of economy grows. Debt levels reach historical extremes. The gap between asset prices and productive output widens. Savings rates decline because saving currency loses value faster than it gains interest. These developments are observable but not widely discussed in mainstream discourse. They are technical matters, we are told, managed by experts. Nothing for the average citizen to worry about. Trust the system. Trust the experts. Trust that mechanisms exist to prevent any serious problem. This reassurance is itself a warning sign. History shows that monetary systems fail when understanding becomes widespread. As long as the mechanics remain mysterious, the system endures. When citizens begin asking how money is created, who benefits from its creation, and whether the current quantity has any relationship to underlying value, the system enters a dangerous phase. The response to these questions matters enormously. In healthy systems, such questions are welcomed and answered transparently. In fragile systems, they are deflected, dismissed, or suppressed. The latter response confirms what the questions implied. In 1720, the French government's fear was not that citizens would revolt or refuse to work. The fear was that they would understand. Once understanding spreads, compliance becomes voluntary rather than automatic, and voluntary compliance can be withdrawn. This is why financial literacy has historically been discouraged among general populations. It is why monetary mechanics are taught as technical specialties rather than civic knowledge. It is why discussions of currency creation are frequently diverted into partisan debates about spending priorities, which assume the money exists, rather than discussions about whether the money itself is legitimate. Every major monetary collapse in history was preceded by a period when questioning the system was characterized as irresponsible, unpatriotic, or economically ignorant. Every collapse was preceded by official assurances that the system was sound. Every collapse was followed by surprise among authorities that the public had lost confidence so suddenly. But the loss was never sudden. It was gradual, accumulating over years, invisible because it was unspoken. Then something often trivial made it speakable. Once speakable, it became undeniable. Once undeniable, it became unstoppable. The question is not whether citizens should understand how money works. They already do, at some level. They see prices rising. They feel purchasing power declining. They sense something is wrong even if they cannot articulate it precisely. The question is what happens when understanding becomes precise enough to be articulated, shared, and acted upon. History suggests that governments find this moment more threatening than almost any external challenge, because power, in the end, rests substantially on the population's willingness to accept the currency the government issues, and willingness requires either ignorance or consent. When ignorance fails, consent must be genuine, and genuine consent requires systems that serve those consenting. The French in 1720 learned this. The Americans in 1780 learned this. Others have learned it repeatedly across centuries. Whether this generation will need to learn it again remains an open question.